So now I think that it is important to take a look into the speech of younger generation to establish the variation which exists. I believe that, at least for Romani, there is this polarization between language which is used as a means of private communication. However, when I mentioned the term to them, they actually got really angry with me, because that term is used by the other.
Welcome everyone to Conversations with Romani Linguists. My name is Anastasiia. I'm a promoter of the Romani language, history and culture.
And I'm Yaron. I'm a linguist specializing in the Romani language.
In this series of interviews, we talk to linguists working on the Romani language. And we are eager to know how they became interested in deeper research into the Romani language, what challenges they faced on their professional path, and what fascinating stories and discoveries they had. And today, we are very happy to introduce our guest, Mirjana Mirić. Mirjana is a senior research associate at the Institution for Balkan Studies in Belgrade. Mirjana, you're very welcome here.
Thank you to both of you for inviting me and also for initiating such kind of podcast.
Thank you very much for agreeing to join us and to share your experience. And, we have the first question for you. Could you tell us, please, where you grew up, perhaps what school you attended, what was your favorite subject at school? So a little bit about your childhood.
Okay, so I was born in Kragujevac. It's a town in central Serbia, but I lived there only until I was 6 years old, and then moved to Belgrade with my family. So I attended schools in Belgrade, my elementary school and also high school, and I also did my studies, the large part of my studies here in Belgrade. As for the favorite subject, I actually enjoyed the language classes. So the classes of Serbian were my favorite. And this is the reason why I enrolled at the Faculty of Philology and started studying linguistics. And I also had a great teacher in Serbian classes in my elementary school. So she was responsible for me developing an interest into languages.
So how interesting. So since your childhood, languages were your, how do we call that?
Like a passion.
Like a passion, yeah. And something that you really like. Could you remind me this word? Vocation. Forgot that word. Okay, in English. Good. Okay, and so what about institute? What in the university? What languages did you study there?
Okay, so I studied general linguistics at the Faculty of Philology at University of Belgrade, and also I did my master's thesis here. So this was a course of general linguistics and various topics in linguistics, syntax, psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, sociolinguistics, all these different disciplines. And as for the languages, we had to have 2-year courses in Serbian, English, French, and also Hebrew. I actually chose Hebrew to study. We were choosing between Latin, ancient Greek, and Hebrew, but the classes of Hebrew were organized more in a modern way, and we also learned some modern language. So these were the languages that I had during my studies. And I also had like a couple of classes, but only short ones. It lasted for maybe a week or two. For one of our general linguistic courses, one of the professors wanted to introduce us to the field linguistics, but at the moment we were not able to go and do the field work. So she invited 2 Romani speakers to the classes, a father and a son. And we had several classes as an occasion to talk to them about Romani language, like how do you say this, how do you say that, and then maybe infer something about the grammar of Romani. Unfortunately, it lasted only for a couple of classes, but it was also very useful to understand that there's a language that we basically hear every day in Belgrade and in Serbia, because we are surrounded by Roma neighbors. But we know so little about their language. So that was the first time, actually, during my studies that I heard about their language, and actually some basic information about the grammar as well.
Very interesting. Do you remember what you felt when you perhaps heard this information about the Romani language? So when you found out more about this language, of course, you mentioned that you saw these people, yeah, but you didn't know a lot about them. But what was your feelings when you started to obtain the more information about them?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. And the basic information they gave us, it was about demonstrative pronouns and some basic word order. So I thought it didn't seem actually too difficult to learn at a time, in comparison to like classes of Hebrew that I never grasped fully until the end. But it was also very interesting. And usually when we are trained as linguists, we are early told that it doesn't matter how the language sounds, so you just work on the language. And I don't have any particular feelings about any language. I do like French, the way French sounds, and I love French music and listening to the films and everything, and also speaking the language. And eventually, when I got immersed into Romani more, I also developed this kind of feeling when working on Romani as well. But as for those first few classes of Romani, I only thought this is something that I would like to acquire more and get more involved with it one day.
Amazing. What about now? What do you do now?
I work at the Institute for Balkan Studies, which is one of the institutes of the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts. And this is a multidisciplinary institute, because we have departments for history, art history, archaeology, anthropology, also linguistics, and we are all working on some issues related to the Balkans. So I work within the Department of Linguistics. Only 4 of us are actually hired within that department, and we are dealing with mainly with the minority languages in Serbia. Currently working on Vlah, Bejaš Romanian, and Romani. Also to an extent with Banat Bulgarian. And we are also doing work on Balkanized varieties or dialects of Serbian language, which are spoken in the southeastern part of Serbia. So the 4 of us currently are dealing with the minority languages from different perspectives. Some of us are interested more in grammar and doing research on language, but we also have an important sociolinguistic project, 3-year project called Vulnerable Languages and Linguistic Varieties in Serbia. It is funded by the Science Fund of the Republic of Serbia, and we are dealing with the levels of endangerment or vulnerability or vitality of 8 minority varieties in Serbia, and Romani is one of them. So within the framework of that project, we developed a questionnaire of approximately 150 questions in different domains of language use, for instance, media, education, institutional support, but also we are interested in intergenerational language transmission, the attitudes of speakers towards their language, and so on. And Romani is a part of that project. So we developed a questionnaire. We did field work for 2 years. Now we are analyzing the data, and also we documented a lot of varieties, some of which are on the verge of extinct, I would say, like Ladino in Serbia. And we also realized, for instance, that Megleno-Romanian, which used to be spoken here by several speakers, no longer exists. And as for Romani, we also discovered many interesting facts in the field regarding different varieties of Romani spoken across Serbia.
Wow, very nice.
This is one of the projects that we now have, which is more sociolinguistically oriented. And as of next week, we will have another one, which is more concentrated on the language. It will deal with the contact between Romani and Serbian, and more specifically about the morphological adaptation of verbs borrowed from Serbian into Romani. And it's a bilateral project with the University of Graz. So it will be a 2-year project, and we will start next week working on it.
You're really busy with all these projects, and it's very exciting, actually.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
And we are eager to speak about it more. And before, I'd like, you have this wonderful experience working with the Romani language. But what about challenges? Did you encounter any challenges working on Romani? And if yes, what were they?
Yeah, there are many challenges and many obstacles in working with Romani. The first challenges that I encountered were when I started learning Romani. I joined my institute in 2017, and 2 colleagues of mine were included in a project which documented and did analysis of one variety of Romani spoken in Eastern Serbia. And when I got a position here at the Institute, they said, like, you're going to join us and we're going to make a Romani-Serbian dictionary. That's like the first output of the project. So I got a lot of data, audio recordings, transcripts of these recordings given by native speakers of Romani, a lot of different grammars and dictionaries. But I realized that we don't have, for that particular variety, this is the Gurbet variety spoken in that part of Serbia, we didn't have specific details about grammar. So we have a lot of different textbooks and literature, which is invaluable, that covers many varieties and many details about the history of Romani and different language levels within Romani. However, the first challenge was actually to learn the language based on many different things, but without the actual course and the material that is generally used when you decide to learn a language, go to a private school or at the university. It's completely different. And also, even when we are now working with some specifics within the grammar of Romani, for instance, I feel that we lack even the descriptions of particular varieties. And this is something that I would like someday to have for many different varieties in Serbia. If one day we get a project or funding, or the people who would be interested in working on that. So that is, like, from the academic point of view, one of my personal challenges. And also we encounter many challenges when we wish to enter the Roma community and work with people, because we are there on our own. We do not have, we do have institutional support, like we have a project within the Institute, but if you do not know people in the field, in the Roma community, it's very difficult to enter. So over the past few years, we basically go to a particular place, a town or a village or a Roma settlement, and then we make our own personal connections, and the word spreads that we are okay, that we're working only in linguistics, and people become interested in speaking to us and working on our questionnaire, or allow us to record them. But generally, that is one of the obstacles, like how to enter a particular community.
it's curious how what was their reaction, especially what was their initial reaction, you know, to your research. So someone comes to you and asks questions about your culture, about your language.
Yeah, well, my experience is only the positive one. Because whenever I ask someone to talk to me, you have people who are busy at the time, or some who are shy or reluctant to be recorded, and then we do not record them. But there are also people who, once they realize that you are interested in their culture, in their language, in their linguistic practices, once you explain what you wish to work on, then they become willing to answer. And also, it was more difficult for me before I became a little bit proficient in Romani, because everything I did at the beginning was in Serbian. But now when you address them in their language, even if it's not their particular variety that I know, but they really show gratitude and positive attitudes towards me knowing the language. And I believe that knowing the language actually opens the door for the researchers who wish to work in a particular Roman community.
Yeah, very nice thought. Thank you. Now I'd like to give floor to Yaron, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, can we go back to two of the projects that you mentioned? And the first, the one that's still ongoing, has been ongoing for a while, and then move on to the one that you said is starting very, very soon now. So for the first, you mentioned vulnerable languages, and it's also a concept that appears in some of your publications already about the vulnerability of Romani in Serbia. What is a vulnerable language to start with?
Yeah.
How does the language become vulnerable, or what are the indicators of it being vulnerable?
Yeah, we first wanted to make a distinction from the term endangered, as explained in various international databases, such as UNESCO's Atlas of the World Languages in Danger and the Ethnologue, because several varieties, not only of Romani, but of other minority languages in Serbia, are marked as endangered to various degrees. And we started within that project of trying to see whether our experience in the field with particular languages is actually the same as the level of endangerment that these databases marked. And we realized
that level of endangerment would mean that there are very few speakers left. So people
yeah, the number of speakers is one of the criteria which are used to establish that their language is endangered. Also, the interrupted intergenerational transmission, which means whether children acquire the language or not. And that is basically maybe the only criterion which is used for different databases. And based on this, and if we only discuss Romani, UNESCO's estimates are that Romani is definitely endangered, which means that not all generations of speakers actually use the language. It is not transmitted to children. And we do not agree with that, because in Serbia, you have many children acquiring Romani in the home, speaking to parents. So we believe that, at least for Serbia, and it means actually for particular communities in particular places, these estimates do not hold. And this is why we use the term vulnerable in the sense to make it less strict than actually a language being endangered. But then we have various different domains in which we see that Romani is used as an oral language, typically in personal communication, with family members, with neighbors if they live in the same surrounding, with kin, but it lacks institutional support, so we do not see any inscriptions in Romani. We rarely see schools, although the legislative framework of Serbia is quite affirmative in that sense, but not all schools that should introduce Romani, at least as an elective subject, do that. So we believe that, at least for Romani, there is this polarization between language which is used as a means of private communication with family members, and this is what we already know from the literature. But now we do have the data that show us that from the questionnaire. And on the other hand, it's almost complete absence from the public life. So in that sense, it's not endangered, but I don't know if we can call it vital, because there is now another factor which influences many Roma families to shift to Serbian, especially if they're more educated. Then they kind of decide, they're all bilingual, but in particular contexts, they tend to use Serbian more. So now we have even the quantitative data that show us that.
So one of the extraordinary features about the Romani language in general in Europe, Serbia included, historically, is that Romani has been spoken as a minority language without a territory, without a state, without a geographically contiguous region. There's no region that is primarily Romani speaking for something like 1,000 years.
Exactly.
As far as we know, we don't know exactly. We don't have the exact documentation, but we infer, and it's actually and it was only spoken in the family primarily. Romani people work, they provide services or are employed by outsiders. All the transactions are with outsiders. Transactions with authorities and professionals are always in the majority language. So the situation that you described as vulnerable, that people only use the language in the home, that's been the situation of Romani for centuries. Yes. And yet it survived more in a way that is more robust, perhaps, than many other languages.
Yeah, language as such, language as a whole, that's true. But if you go into particular communities, and I will give you an example of the community that we extensively visited during field work, that's the town of Knjaževac in eastern Serbia. We have records by Franz Miklošić that it was Arli variety of Romani spoken over 100 years ago in that area. And my colleagues started the project in 2015 and 16, where they wanted to see whether this variety particularly is spoken still there. But all members of the Arli community shifted to Serbian over a course of decades. And now they don't speak any Romani at all. However, other communities migrated from Romania and other parts of Serbia. Now they live also in the same town. They speak mainly the Gurbet variety and also Lejaš variety to a certain extent. So for that particular community, you can say that the Gurbet variety is vital because it's still spoken at home. All children basically acquire language. Now they even have an elective subject at primary school. However, when you discuss the Arli community, you can't say that for them language, Romani language survived. So they do not speak the language. So I feel that we have the need for some kind of terminology that would grasp something between definitely endangered and completely vital. And this is why I use the term vulnerable.
And you apply those terms, as you've explained to us, also to particular varieties of Romani. So they're not the same.
They're not the same.
Does it happen, you mentioned that people abandon Romani in favor of the majority language. Does it sometimes happen that people abandon one variety of Romani in favor of another variety of Romani? So the old variety is vulnerable, but the other variety is still in the same community. Does that happen?
Yeah, that happens. And again, on the example of this town of Knjaževac in eastern Serbia. So now the Gurbet variety, which belongs to the Southern Vlach group of dialects, dominates in terms of numbers of speakers. Simply, there are many Gurbet Roma living in that town and the surrounding villages, but also a significantly smaller number of Lejash speakers live there. But they frequently, if they are they are married to a speaker of a different Romani variety, then Lejash tend to become Gurbet speakers, because this is the dominant variety. When they meet their neighbors or go to the market, then this is some kind of, I don't know if I can call it lingua franca, it's not, but it's actually one variety which dominates now. And they do, especially if you have children who acquire both these varieties, this Gurbet one will prevail. Because there are many more Gurbet speakers, also children play in the street with other Gurbet speakers, and they communicate with many Gurbet speakers. So in this sense, if we could compare these two varieties, the Gurbet one would be vital in that particular town, but the Lejash would become more vulnerable or even endangered.
And the Lejash in Serbia is a dialect of Romani, because elsewhere Lejash in Romania, for example, are Romanian speakers.
Yeah, they're speakers of Romani. But they do have a lot of borrowed vocabulary from Romanian. And according to some preliminary analysis, it is close to other Northern Vlach varieties.
Right. Okay. So Northern Vlach, Southern Vlach, for those listeners who are not familiar, is a classification of the dialects of Romani according to their structural features and sometimes the location. We'll come back to that perhaps in a moment, but I just wanted to pick up on another interesting detail that you mentioned. You referred to electives in the schools. So from that, I understand that Romani is being taught in schools as a subject in Serbia. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and where does the origin of that come from? Because it's very, very exceptional. There's not many places in Europe where Romani is taught in schools, and who teaches and how is the teaching organized, and what's the uptake from Roma among Roma?
Yeah, that's one of the topics that I'm really interested in. Because the legislation of Serbia is, I would say, quite positive about, at least declaratively, in terms of different laws, some of them being the law on primary and secondary education, preschool education, which support the idea of introducing minority languages into schools. And there are actually three modalities for minority language instruction in school. One of them is being the complete full education, for instance, primary language education in the language of the minority. That means that they also take subjects such as biology, physics, chemistry in their own language. However, that is only realized for several minorities in Vojvodina, such as Hungarians, Slovaks, Romanians, because several schools in particular places have a necessary number of students to have this form of education. The second modality would be to have the so-called bilingual education. That means that all subjects you attend in both Serbian as the majority language and in your own minority language. However, this option does not exist anywhere when it comes to the minority languages. And the third option, the third modality would be to have this optional elective subject called the mother tongue with elements of national culture. And it can be introduced in any school which has 15 or more students who applied to have these kind of classes. And there are some laws and regulations that set the rules about that. And according to the data available from the Ministry of Education, this year this school year, there are 1,300 approximately students who attend this elective subject of Romani classes in different parts of Serbia.
In the whole country?
Yeah, in the whole country, yeah.
And what's the estimated population of speakers of Romani in Serbia?
According to the last census, a little bit less than 80,000 speakers. These are official figures.
Okay.
So this was officially. In previous years, the Ministry of Education published their data, and there were approximately 2,500 students who enrolled in these Romani language classes across Serbia. However,
something like 10% of school children who are Romani, of Romani background, something like
or
that?
even less.
Yes.
Or even less, yeah, because there are many Roma students at schools, but there are many issues there. First of all, Romani, even in Serbia, is diverse in terms of different dialects. So we have Arli variety, for instance, spoken in the very south of Serbia and also in some parts of Belgrade. Gurbet variety, Kalderaš variety, so many different varieties across the territory. However, the textbooks and the grammars they use are based on the version that the policymakers call the standardized variety of Romani, which is founded on basically the Gurbet variety and some elements of two other Kalderaš and Lejaš varieties. However, the main obstacle for students, especially those who speak a completely different variety, such as Arli, they do not understand the language in the textbooks. So according to one teacher of these classes, I worked with her for a long time. She says like they understand maybe 20% of the material. So that's one of the issues. And there are also many schools that do have the enough number of students, like 15 per school, to enroll in these classes. However, these schools cannot find teachers because they need to have at least, they have to be Romani speakers with at least a high school diploma. And they have to go to a course which would train them to be Romani language teachers. However, not enough people apply for this program. So even if there are interested students, they cannot find teachers. And also some parents, this is what I also encountered in my fieldwork, some parents are not informed that there is a possibility for their children to attend Romani classes. So this is, I believe, still work in progress. And I try in my papers and conference presentations, especially here in Serbia, to highlight the issues and the problems about this particular subject. Because other languages, such as Romanian, Hungarian, Slovakian, they don't experience the same issues that Roma community does.
So it's very interesting that there's quite a travel between the point of policy goodwill that enables and opens up a potential pathway, excuse me, and the actual implementation of it in terms of both the provisions and the uptake of the provisions. Who trains the teachers when there are opportunities to train them? And who writes the curriculum? Who puts together the textbooks?
Yeah, the textbooks are written by well-educated native speakers of Romani. One of them who was responsible for the textbooks of for the 5th and the 6th grade of the elementary school. She also teaches Romani at a vocational school for kindergarten teachers. And there is also a Center for Evaluation in Education, which belongs to the Ministry of Education. They develop a program in which they educate teachers. But as I said, many people enroll in these courses who are not speakers of the variety which is presented as the standardized form in these textbooks. So basically, my experience, I also recorded some of the classes. My experience is that they kind of adjust the class to the needs and the variety that students speak in the classroom, like the majority variety.
So they do that. So when you say they adjust, the teachers do it spontaneously to accommodate
Yes.
of other dialects. So that's really interesting, because what we're basically seeing is a picture where on the one hand there is legislation and rules and procedures, but at the same time, for it to work, the people involved need to have a considerable sense of agency for themselves. They have to be able to take the freedom and the initiative to do things in a different way in order to cater for the pluralism of different varieties. And that seems to be kind of an essential part of the Romani experience. Would you agree that this notion of pluralism?
Yes, I agree. And what I encountered in one of these classes that I recorded and observed is that even if you have at least one student who speaks Lejash or a different kind of variety, then the teacher would ask him or her, how do you say this in your variety? And they will write this down, and then they will explore different vocabulary and different ways of saying particular things. So there is a gap, a huge gap, I would say, between the legislation on the one hand and also the implementation of everything that they have imagined and set as rules. However, all these teachers and people who are involved, they're also pedagogical assistants who help Roma children with other classes, not just with Romani. They are extremely engaged in helping and trying to do their best to make use of what's given for them, but just to kind of motivate students to attend not only Romani classes, but school in general, because there is a high rate of high dropout rate of students during the elementary school education. And also, according to the last census in 2022, there are 80% of Roma in Serbia, age 15 and older, who have elementary school as the highest level of their education. So things are improving because they at least complete this level of education, but there are also still many of them who stay only for 1 or 2 years in school, or don't go to school at all. That's also the case.
And do you obtain your insights into the situation in schools through questionnaires and interviews of teachers or parents, or do you also do classroom observations?
I did all of that. I did classroom observations also in this town of Knjaževac, because this is the variety that I know, and also we have a very nice collaboration with the local library and with that particular Romani teacher and pedagogical assistant, and they are very open. So I observed classes. Also, this local library organizes some workshops for Roma kids that I also observed, and they learn about their culture, tradition, also speak in their language. But I also interviewed parents about different educational issues and problems that they encounter. And last year, with the help of that Romani teacher, I also created a questionnaire for children, which aims to explore their attitudes towards Romani classes and the problems. And they also evaluated different activities. They evaluated their teacher on a scale. And according to the results, many of them, like over 90%, feel comfortable during the classes. They love going. They feel nice before they should go to class. They enjoy different activities. The majority of them does not like writing in Romani, but they like other things, especially learning about their culture and tradition. So they are motivated. They have positive attitudes towards the classes. But they also said that they do not fully understand the language in the textbooks and that they speak a little bit differently at home. So I believe that this is also important to take into account and maybe provide some list of recommendations to the policymakers and people who are responsible for creating the curriculum for this particular class.
And what would you recommend at this point in time, based on your observations so far? Where is there room for improvement?
The first and most important thing is this pluricentric approach to language standardization, and I don't see any reason why, if we do have a textbook in, let's say, Gurbet Romani, we do have educated people who can translate that textbook into Arli variety or any other variety, and let schools and Romani teachers choose the textbook that they will use. That's first thing. And also, I would say that improvements have to be made in informing the parents about the option of enrolling their children into these classes, because they're not all aware. For instance, I live in a Belgrade suburb settlement called Batajnica. We have, I would say, a substantial Roma community, over 1,000 Roma people there. There are 3 elementary schools. One of them enrolls basically the majority of Roma children. And when I talk to parents during the field work for these sociolinguistic questionnaires, when I ask, do your children attend Romani at school? Have you heard that there is this possibility? They were not aware of it. So that means that school, although it is obliged to provide a list of possible languages that their children can take from the list of minority languages, the school does not do that. So a lot of promotion should be done as well.
Much of this, I mean, it's very impressive to hear that schools, even if it's somewhat abstract or in theory, but that they're obliged to provide Romani. And to what extent do you think this goes back in tradition to a few decades? I mean, former Yugoslavia was one of the only countries actually that recognized Romani and promoted Romani literacy. And even the term Romani, everybody knows what Romski is. And in other European countries, it's only been since the 1990s that people, authorities shifted away from the term gypsy and started to recognize Romani and understand that it's an independent language. So do you think there's a tradition here? And some of your work has been around Rade Uhlik, who was also a philologist who did a lot of work on Romani. So to what extent is there a tradition both of political institutions, perhaps Romani activism, and academics in Serbia who laid the foundations for the discussion that you have today in Serbia?
Yeah, these Roma activists, and also especially the ones who were well educated, especially in the 60s and 70s, they initiated the whole Roma movement across the former Yugoslavia, and some of them continued also working on promoting the idea of Romani language standardization. And without their efforts, regardless of the fact that these textbooks or the grammars are not useful to every student in school, but generally I support their idea of promoting language in that way. What was also important in the period of Yugoslavia was that the minorities had all the rights in promoting their culture and their language. So also when I speak in the field with my respondents about various manifestations, such as folklore, music festivals, and so on, they say it doesn't exist now, but in the 70s and 80s, like we traveled across the country and we danced in Romani costumes, promoting Romani music and Romani dance, Romani folklore music especially. But that ceased to exist altogether. There may be some personal efforts or particular people to do that, but there is no, I would say, institutional support for this. What is also important about the language is that, for instance, the Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts has a board, Odbor za proučavanje života i običaja Roma, that's in Serbian, the board for the study of life and customs of Roma. And given that it is the board within the academia, they do also organize various kind of things, and they include not only scholars like linguists and sociologists and historians who work on different topics within Romani studies, but they also include many Roma activists who are active promoters of languages, their language and culture.
Thank you. In a moment, I'd like to go back and ask you to very briefly talk about the new project that's about to start. But before we do that, the name Gurbet has come up often in the conversation as the variety that you hesitantly referred to it as perhaps a lingua franca, or the more dominant, or perhaps more prestigious, that's my word, but the less vulnerable, perhaps more vital variety, the one in which the textbooks are written. And you also alluded to its classification in Romani dialectology as a Southern Vlach. And you also mentioned that at some point, or in some places, Vlach Gurbet speakers are people who came from elsewhere. They moved in within the country. So can you tell us a little bit about what is Gurbet Romani? What does the name represent? Where does it come from? What is its origins? How widespread is it? And what is its relation to other dialects of Romani?
Yeah, well, first, the first time I encountered that term was during the field work in eastern part of Serbia, where the community that we worked with referred to themselves as Gurbet. And their language also reflected the descriptions that we know from the literature. Sometimes we also refer to it as the Gurbet-like variety because it shares various structural features with what we know to be the Gurbet, either from the scientific literature or also from what we know based on our field work. However, I would, before I also get into a little bit more details about it, I would like to mention that I did this field work in my part of town, in Batajnica, where the community who refer to themselves as Sremski Roma live. Based on the features of their language, that should be the Gurbet variety, what we know from the linguistic descriptions. However, when I mentioned the term to them, they actually got really angry with me because that term is used by the other hardly Muslim community in the same suburb, in the same neighborhood, and they perceive it as something negative. So they don't like to be called Gurbet. So I had quite some problems before I were able to start working with them in documenting their language and also doing the questionnaire to actually prove that I'm not using it as a rude term to call them. It is usually used as a term for the group of people who were nomads and moved a lot, and some of our respondents also mention that. However, another term is also used for, not for the same group, but for the same kind of nomads, also across Serbia. It is the name Čergari, the ones who moved with their trailers and worked different kind of crafts, especially in different parts of Serbia. But they also differ among themselves, and also in different parts of Serbia, although they say that they speak the same variety, and I recognize the morphology and the syntax and the vocabulary, there are also differences and variations between these different varieties. So I've learned Gurbet in Eastern Serbia, and for instance, when they want to ask someone what you're doing, they would say "Socere." So they have palatalization. They also omit the ending for the second person singular. However, in the part where I live, they say it differently, also in terms of prosody. So they don't say it "socere," also with the stress at the last syllable. They say "socere." So this is the prosody is a little bit different and resembles the prosody of the dialect of Serbian, which is spoken in that area. So these are only minor differences, but there are some even more linguistically important ones as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, finally, maybe you can tell us in a few words about the project that is starting now. You hinted before that it has a very, very technical linguistic dimension. So it's looking at very particular aspects of grammar. But in general terms, if you can, maybe just tell us what is the problem that you are trying to address there and analyze, and how do you go about doing it?
Yes, so the plan is to make a database of verbs which are borrowed from Serbian into Romani. And one of my interests in Romani linguistics includes the contact linguistics. So basically what happens with the language, with the Romani language, once it enters the contact with other languages, and the current contact language is Serbian. However, Romani, during the course of history, has entered many contacts, and we observe at the different levels of grammar the influences of other languages. What is interesting for this project is that we will focus on the verbs, so words meaning read, walk, go, watch, and so on, which are adapted into Romani once borrowed from a different language in a particular way. So Romani uses particular markers, pieces of words, to signal that a certain word is borrowed from a different language. Some of these markers are borrowed even from the Byzantine Greek and were preserved in different varieties of Romani. What we observe in this particular Gurbet variety that we are working with is that these markers are being dropped and not so extensively used any longer. So we wish to observe these frequencies into details. That's one part. And the other part is to actually map the structure of Serbian words and whether different affixes or theme vowels, more importantly, are mapped onto the Romani verbs. So the pieces or elements which contain the information on the valency, on the aspect, and different kind of things, how they map into Romani words, verbs, and to see whether there are any strict patterns of distribution which are similar or different across different verbs.
Can you give us one or two examples of words like that?
Yes. So, for instance, the verb in Serbian for read would be čitati, and it has the root čita and the theme vowel a, čita, before the infinitive ending. In Romani, in third person singular of the present tense, it is adapted as citol. So the root remains the same, but now we have a thin vowel o. And then we have the Romani inherited ending for a particular tense and person and number. We also find examples of verbs which preserve sar as a marker. For instance, to live in Serbian is živeti. Živ is the root, meaning to live. In Romani, it can be živil with Serbian root, the marker E, and then L as an ending. But it can also be živol, so with O, with a different marker. And it can also be živosarel. That sar is what we have from earlier times, even from the contact with Greek. So the main question for us is to establish how do speakers do not choose, but what happens when they have the Serbian verb? How does it get into one class with O or another with E? We have some preliminary results that based on the thin vowels in Serbian, they get distributed across the two different classes, and actually which verbs preserve these older adaptation markers that we find in some other dialects.
Right. Well, for a linguist, it really is fascinating. And as you know, I've done some work on this area many years ago. So I'm really, really excited to see what you find out. Because first of all, different dialects of Romani behave in different ways, but also it's something that's very dynamic, and the language changes across generations. And it may be that the things that you discover not only are in a variety that's never been described before under that aspect, but perhaps they're new. Perhaps it's a new generation that does differently, because I think some of the
yes, because we do have data. We do have data from elementary school students. I recorded several hours of material, and we also have a native speaker to transcribe it. So we do already have some linguistic features that we analyze across different generations. And I'm particularly interested in that because we observe some kind of micro changes between generation of like children and their parents or grandparents. For instance, we do not find these morphological adaptation markers in children's verbs. Some of the adult speakers do preserve it. And there are some other also linguistic analysis that I did, for instance, for the definite article in Romani. Children tend to omit it with proper names significantly, which is the influence of the fact that they go to school and encounter proper names without the article and so on. But there are these micro changes, because for Romani it's very difficult, I would say. We do not have any written records of the previous stages of language, not even from like 40, 50, let alone 200 years ago. So now I think that it is important to take a look into the speech of younger generation to establish the variation which exists. It's a small scale variation, but we see how language changes. We have a lot of ongoing changes at this particular moment. And we see how language is dynamic, which is important. For Romani, it's also very interesting because we might not observe so many changes like in Serbian. And for vocabulary, yes, but for grammar,
I wanted to interject that Romani, as you said, is always in contact, and so it always has some kind of mechanism of handling the bilingualism at the level of conversation, but also at the level of the sentence and the grammar of the word. But it's not the only language. I mean, some of our listeners are familiar with German, and if you are, then you know that French verbs that were borrowed into German in the 19th century and earlier usually have this ending iren, ir, So, for example, stationner becomes stationieren in German. But nowadays, many English verbs are borrowed into German. They don't have that. So we say in German, downloaden, to download something. We don't say downloadieren. So those dynamics have kicked in German as well, in around the same phenomenon. So Romani is not unique, but because it has so much contact and so many different varieties, it allows a very interesting laboratory, if one can use that term, to establish the principles, and maybe they're applicable elsewhere. And we also, from the language and the way it's structured, it's not just an abstract thing. We also learn a lot about people's attitudes toward languages. We started the conversation with vulnerability and vitality of languages. And perhaps the fact that the younger generations treat verbs from the other language in a different way shows that they integrate them more naturally, perhaps. So there's a different attitude, perhaps, to the bilingualism. Well, this is all fascinating, but we are running a little bit out of time. We don't want to keep you all day, although I'm sure we could continue the conversation for a whole week. But I'd like to hand back to Anastasiia now for a couple of concluding questions.
Yeah, thank you. I was listening to you very carefully. I didn't want to interrupt. And, I would like some clarify one thing, because I'm excited to find out about the existence of formal Romani classes at school. And perhaps you mentioned, I just missed it, but could you please clarify this thing? Those classes which you mentioned at school, Romani classes, are they just like Romani language classes, or other subjects are available in Romani? For example, like math in Romani, science in Romani?
Yeah, I didn't mention it. I only mentioned there are 3 options, but for Romani, only this option of 1 subject, which is 2 classes per week, which is available as a subject, and it's optional. So even if you are Roma, you don't and speak Romani, you don't have to apply for these classes. So this is an elective subject. Yeah, there were some proposals that for different minority languages, this bilingual education gets introduced, because there are so many cognitive benefits of having bilingual education. And many scientific psycholinguistic research that proves that. However, in Serbia, those were the national councils of national minorities that were actually against the bilingual education. For Romani, they listed as a reason that they do not have means and experts who would provide textbooks in for different subjects in Romani language, like biology or physics or something. For other minorities, such as Hungarians, they already have the full education available in Hungarian, with Serbian only with 2 classes per week. So they would think that bilingual education would kind of decrease the number of students who would enroll in the overall education in Hungarian. So there are also some political issues and different social issues regarding the organization of the classes. But I believe that the situation has been improving, at least if we compare it to, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. More and more students are actually enrolling in the classes, but the promotion of these classes is necessary.
I see. Thank you very much for this clarification. Okay, and now, like personal questions. What do you consider to be your major discovery? You mentioned a lot of things, wonderful, amazing thing. You have wonderful experience, but which one you consider major discovery?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I would call it discoveries. Yeah, there are particular things that for me were revelations, some kind of revelations. One of them is that you can observe these ongoing changes in the language, but I'm not going to go into details because I already mentioned them. But there was one, although I'm always interested in grammar, but this sociolinguistic project kind of got me into a different area of linguistics. So while I was doing field work in the place where I live with the Roma community, I realized that two Roma groups live there. These are Sremski Roma, who speak Gurbet or Gurbet-like variety, and they don't like to be called Gurbet. And they have lived in this place for over 100 years. And they belong to the Orthodox Church. And I've talked to some of the family members of a person who actually composed the Romani anthem. So he was born and raised there. And when you mention his name, they're all very, very proud. And they also very excitedly mention that he used to live there, and they all have the same last name, Jovanović, those who are Sremski Roma. And also another group came approximately 30 or 40 years ago, because Yugoslavia experienced like large-scale migrations across the country of not only minorities, but of various nations. And Arli Roma from the most southern part of Serbia migrated to this particular area of Belgrade. And the relations between these two communities, and although they are Roma, they do not speak the same variety. They belong to different denominations. And my personal kind of surprise, I would say, was how they do not work together, not only in terms of language or culture, but they're like basically two separate groups of Roma who do not exchange anything between them. And it also happens that these newly migrated Roma, they, according to my preliminary analysis, they preserve their language to a larger extent than those who were here long before they came, in the sense that Sremski Roma are well integrated into the majority community, and different generations of speakers actually attended school in Serbian, so they speak Serbian very well. Unlike these others who migrated from the part of Serbia where also Albanian is extensively spoken, and some of them also speak Albanian. So it would be very interesting to observe also in the future the dynamics of these two groups, not only in terms of language, but also their relations and culture and so on.
Interesting. You are very active in the Romani field, and what do you still wish to achieve?
What do I wish to achieve? Well, I wish to find the time to explore more. But I have a plan, or I don't know, an idea. I worked for a long time during my master's studies and PhD studies on language acquisition of Serbian. I was mainly focused on doing different experimental and corpus work on Serbian language acquisition. And what I do have as an idea is to try to make a corpus of the Romani child language, which would have several children longitudinally recorded for several years. Their recordings should be transcribed, and we should make like a true corpus, whether it could be a single variety in several different places or several different varieties, not only in Serbia, maybe in other countries which would be interested in that. But I would, like if I could choose the topic of some future project and research, it would be a child language, probably bilingual corpus, because even as children, at least in Serbia, even Roma children are also bilingual in Romani and Serbian. So I'm interested in developing such a corpus someday in the future, because we basically don't have any research in this domain. There are some particular special analyses, but a proper corpus like the ones that exist on the child's database, we do not have it for Romani. And this would allow us to actually explore the dynamics of the language development, the influence of other languages, bilingual development as well.
Thank you for sharing with us your ideas. It's very interesting idea.
Join me in.
Of course. I would like to know about the results, of this experiment. It's really interesting to compare and. Okay, wish you a lot of success in this.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Mirjana, for being with us, and thank you very much for this interview and for sharing your experience.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This was really interesting.
And thank you for being with us and watching the interview. Subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, and see you next time in our new episode. Bye for now.
Bye.